And we are live. Cool.
And we are now recording to Audio Hijack. So say something, Nate, so I can make sure I'm still hearing everything.
This is Nate Blyton, bald redhead, blue-eyed beard person, as you can see in the video.
It's very rare to have a non-beard person on this show.
Right.
All right, I think we are about ready then.
Okay.
So there will be theme song music to splice in. Hi, I'm Ben Furman,
I'm Nate Blyton.
and this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news and product information.
Woohoo.
So MuseScore, the open source competitor to Finale, Sibelius, and that other one that no one talks about, has come out with their big 2.0 release. There are a huge number of changes. It's received a massive overhaul to the UI. It looks gorgeous, still Qt based, very fast, very nice. It has huge layout improvements, including magnetic layout, feathered beams, and it's got freaking quarter tones that you can just drag and drop in there now. On top of that, you can create a non-standard key that is totally nonlinear, has quarter tones, mixes those in whatever order you want just by clicking on the staff with whatever uh, type of accidental you want to use. I've been playing around with it. It's awesome. I love it. It's still missing a couple of essential features that I have to use, but by 3.0, I will probably be dropping my Finale license if they keep it up.
Oh man, that's big talk. MuseScore being a real competitor in that way. That's amazing. Um, and in other news from Propellerhead's Reason, Reason has been updated to 8.2. New features include an improved patch browser, more colors for tracks, which is a huge help, an auto-update system so you can stop moving your orchestra and factory banks with every update finally, as Ben says, and the end of 32-bit support, which is pretty big. So if you're on a 32-bit system still, this will kind of be it for you. It's 2015, time to get on board with the 64-bit bandwagon.
Speaking of synth updates, Cakewalk has finally updated Rapture. The last time they updated this was back when Snow Leopard had just come out for the Mac. So it's been a couple of years, which is unfortunate because it's always been a really, really great synth plugin. Hugely overpowered for what most people will use it for, but if you didn't have a PPC compatible Mac, you could no longer use it. Had to use some of that Rosetta code for whatever reason.
Mhm.
It's now Rapture Pro. It will support both the Rapture and the Dimension libraries. If you have the Dimension synth, you can start using that again. It's going to be compatible with everything up through the current version of OS X and Windows 8, probably the next couple of versions as well. The upgrade price from regular Rapture is set to be $100. It should be coming out later this month, and since it's Cakewalk, you might even find it on Steam.
With all your other good gaming needs, you can find Cakewalk too. Um, Speaking of Windowsy things, there's big news from the open source DAW Ardor. Ardor 4.0 is out, and this includes a long overdue and gorgeous UI update to the open source DAW, removing Jack from a requirement to the supported audio system. And taking out Jack is a big thing because that's been like part of the installation process. Is you have to figure out how to get Jack running on your system, and then get Ardor going, and then you can start actually experimenting with it and stuff.
Right. Which has always
Removing,
been dead easy on Linux, but
yeah,
kind of terrible on a Mac.
yeah. So in addition to now improving the support on both those systems, there's a Windows version, indeed, which is a pretty epic thing. There's a bunch of other. So Ben writes, it's not an official release for Windows as of yet, but an unsupported nightly bit or nightly build, and it's in 32-bit and 64-bit versions. Yeah, the Windows version will continue to develop, but the features that you can find for this Ardor 4 are pretty impressive. I'm personally interested in diving into the implementation and new support that they've got for the MIDI tracks and Surface and everything. It's going to be pretty exciting to work with, so check it out.
Yeah. I used Ardour through version 2 just because I couldn't afford anything else at the time, and it was always a really solid program, very, very stable. And I think I hit a record of 200 tracks at one point using that.
Yeah.
So it's a great program, and it is open source. The source code is free, but you do have to donate at least $1 to download the program.
Mm-hmm. Totally worth it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, give them all your money, or at least some of it, and you get to use this lovely program.
Yes, help them find a Windows developer to put whatever feature is missing from the current Windows build into the future ones.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yep. But today we are joined by Mike McFerrin. Mike is the professor of music composition, composer in residence, and director of the music tech program at Lewis University, which is just outside of Chicago. He is also the co-founder and director of Electronic Music Midwest, which has a submission deadline coming up very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And he is the chair of the executive committee of SCI, which hopefully many of our listeners are members of as well. So, Mike, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So let's start off with EMM. That is coming up soon. When is the deadline?
Absolutely, May 20th, and you can submit your works at emmfestival.org. If you have any issues with submission, or even if you might need an extra day, just let me know. You can drop me an email directly from emmfestival.org, and we're here to help you get your piece submitted and hopefully present it at our festival next November.
Now, you have a special guest performer coming in as well.
We do. Each year, we try to get a spectacular performer who has experience performing new electroacoustic music. In the past, we've had the fabulous Rebecca Ash, famous flute player, highly acclaimed flute player. We've had Kari Johnson, pianist. And this year, we're just really thrilled to have Keith Benjamin as our guest performer. He's a trumpet player who teaches at the University of Missouri Kansas City Conservatory of Music. For those of you who are in Seamus or who get the Seamus CDs, he's featured on probably most famously on Jim Moberly's Icarus Wept recording.
Mm-hmm.
He's an outstanding trumpeter, and I hope we get a lot of submissions for him to consider. I should mention you can find all of his more information about him on our website at emmfestival.org. But I neglected to mention earlier that the dates for EMM will be November 19th through the 21st. EMM will be held at Kansas City, Kansas Community College, which is on the Kansas side of Kansas City, and we hold it there every other year.
Cool. That's where Ian Corbett is teaching. If I'm not
That's right. Ian runs the technology program there. He is our director of technology, and he's outstanding at what he does. We have, I think, some of the best sound in the conference business.
Yeah. For some of our listeners who might not be familiar, this EMM is Electronic Music Midwest, and it's been a foothold of 8-speaker surround diffusion and stuff. And I'm really curious, actually, if you could talk about what kind of setup you might have for the festival this year with the new location.
Well, each year we have our own gear. And each year we feature an 8-speaker surround sound diffusion system. It's actually an 8.2.
Okay.
Nice.
Because we have 2 giant subwoofers that really rock the house. They're 2 EAW QSC subwoofers.
Wow.
We also have a gigantic Soundcraft MH3. It's a 32-channel board. We've named it Emily over the years. I don't know really why. But it's so big it has to have its own name. And we also, our 8-channel speakers are matched Mackie 1521 biamp speakers. Okay. So that's the fundamental system that we have for sound. So there's lots of really cool toys that go along with that, some reverb and things like that. But our goal really at EMM is to provide a system that is reliable and that sounds good. I mean, we're really interested in creating good sound for people.
Nice. Now, I personally haven't ever had this opportunity of working with a system like that. I'm curious what it's like for composers who bring in their music working with the system that you have for the first time. I could see that being an interesting, like, expansive thing to learn to use.
Well, it can be rather intimidating, to be honest with you. It's like I said, the mixer's huge, but
Yeah.
you know, once you recognize that mixers all do the same thing, it's just how much of it there is. It makes it a little bit easier. Our Ian and as well as Jason Bolte, who's another director of music technology, both of them are there with the composer. The composer, of course, most of the composers will run their own pieces, but the technical directors are sitting right by their side, and we're there to answer any questions and to provide any feedback if solicited to do so. It can be a little intimidating. I would say that many of the pieces, the fixed media pieces that we present, are actually 2-channel. The actual number of 8-channel works that we get is relatively small. It's been getting smaller over the last 10 years, I've noticed. I don't know if that's a trend in the EA world or not, but it just seems that there's more people just writing stereo works and then choosing to diffuse them live than there was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Could be the prevalence of laptops, like everybody mixing on headphones instead of having access to a system in a room, kind of thing.
That's right, and I mean, people can buy, you know, relatively inexpensive audio interfaces that are going to USB or Thunderbolt into their Macs, and but even those, many of them will only have 8 physical outputs, and so, you know, how are you going to write an 8.1 piece if you can't sum that down into to get to a subwoofer or whatever? So I agree with you. I think a lot of it has to do with people working on laptops, and you know, it's kind of 8-channel surround has really been only relegated to the concert music world in academia. It hasn't really made it into commercial music at all.
Right. A lot of that also is the price that you have to pay to get the 8.1 speakers. So much of that can only be afforded by the institutions and not by individual composers or listeners.
Yeah, even the cheap systems, even the cheap speakers, it can be. I mean, getting a 5.1 system, that's certainly accessible. But to do an 8-channel, and in my situation, it's not necessarily so much about getting the equipment as it is getting the space to set it up in. I just finished an 8-channel work. And, you know, I'd be mixing it, but it would take an hour to set it up before I could start working, and then I'd work, and then I'd have to tear it down, and you know, every time I wanted to work on the mix, I'd have to go through that process.
Yeah, that's a heavy thing, and I can imagine there'd be you'd have to get some pretty specific software and hardware with the computer to be able to output that. You mentioned the audio interface where people might not have that, but I know a lot of like digital audio workstations that people work with might not completely support getting 8 channels or more of output as well.
Right. Well, actually, there's actually some pretty good ones out there right now. Yeah. Ones like Reaper that allows. In fact, I just did an event last night where we did David McIntyre's Landscape of Descent. It's a 60-minute work for video and fixed media.
Cool.
And he was running it directly from Reaper, which is essentially a free DAW.
Right.
But you know, certainly Pro Tools can do it. I mean, I have a Pro Tools LE system, and so when I do 8-channel stuff, I'm doing it ghetto version. You know, multiply tracks and things like that. Right. Certainly, Max makes it relatively easy, as does C-Sound. So, I mean, C-Sound can easily generate multi-channel audio files that can then be dropped into whatever DAW you're using.
Yeah.
But it can be done on the cheap, but like most things, the more money you throw at it, the better your product sometimes.
Yeah, right.
It's
And
kind of
like,
like brewing beer, you know. I quit brewing beer because I just realized I didn't have enough money to throw at it.
it's all about the ingredients,
That's
exactly.
That's
right.
what it always is.
It's all about the equipment, you know. So
Absolutely.
Well, eventually we will get to a point where it hopefully becomes more prevalent. I know I would love to see more 8.1 pieces being performed at concerts as well.
it's a whole different beast, and it's one of those things. It's fun to work with, and you know, the first multi-channel pieces that you do as a composer, you know, there are these, you know, pitfalls that everybody wants to, you know, jump into, and I did it myself with pieces. My first multi-channel pieces, it's like, okay, great, I've got sound coming from behind me, so what can I do with that?
Yeah.
And pretty soon you find yourself just pulling every gimmick out of the book because you can. And, you know, it flies against other compositional processes and techniques that you've studied and thought about. But for whatever reason, there's something about having multiple speakers that makes you kind of abandon logic and say, yeah, I'm going to see how much sound I can have coming from around people, or I'm going to do lots of stuff in circles, and
Yeah.
so it's really easy to jump into those types of cliches.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I swear that one of these days I'm going to write sort of a hated practices of electroacoustic music, and one of the things that will be there is panning in a circular motion around the audience with the same sample. Or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. You know, and the thing is, you know, you always tell yourself, you know, I'm not going to do that. You know, that composer, how dare he for, you know, doing that? And then you get blessed with this opportunity to write a piece for multi-channel sound, and that's the first thing you want to do, right? Just to say you did it. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like the Hello World of
Exactly.
multi-channel.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great example.
Nice.
But you would never write a piece with that.
No, indeed not.
Which,
But so, the electroacoustic, or so Electronic Music Midwest has been around for a little while, though. I read it formed in 2002, so it's been going strong for a little while now, huh?
Yeah. You know, it actually started in 2000.
Okay.
I was finishing up in Kansas City. And I was a sabbatical replacement for my mentor, and I don't know why I had to defend my dissertation, and I was teaching classes, and I said to myself, I don't have enough to do, so let's host a festival. And I was also teaching out at Kansas City, Kansas Community College, actually, teaching a couple of classes. And I went to the person who was in charge there, and I said, hey, and she was very much interested in electronic music and wanted to do something. And I said, well, you know, I've got these speakers. Let's go put them up, and let's invite people to come and see who will actually do that. I had actually kind of been on the rebound from a rather bad experience, and that was kind of the maybe this is a little bit too much insight into my personality, but you know, sometimes when I get pissed off, I just feel like I should be able to do it better, and I can't really complain about it until I try to do it better. But I had been to a conference, which will go unnamed, and I had, you know, I was a grad student. I didn't have any money. My wife was supporting us as I was trying to finish up, but you know, I had an opportunity to take a piece that I had written, a 5-minute piano piece, and my pianist, and we drove cross country to this conference. And when I got there, the conference host had this demeanor, this attitude, as though he was doing me a giant favor by programming my piece, and it really left a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
And my first instinct was to really complain about it, but then I thought, well, that's not fair. At least he's hosting a conference. I'm not. And you know, so let me see if I can do it better. And that's really how it got its start. And that first year, it was called the Kansas City Electronic Music Festival. And then I was extremely lucky to land a job that somebody would actually want to hire me to do this that summer. And I came here to Lewis University, and we had, in the spring of 2001 we did electronic music at Lewis, and then in 2002 we started in the fall where we actually combined forces, and it officially became Electronic Music Midwest at that point. So we're actually celebrating our 15th year.
Cool.
Nice. Now, by my quick calculations and Google search, I think that makes you the longest running festival of electroacoustic music in the U.S.
Yeah, well, if you say so. There's some other good ones out there. You know, one of the people that was running one for a long time, and he finally he gave it up. But his festival was great. Was Jim Sane from the University of Florida.
Right.
And I think he made it 15 or 16 years. So I think his lasted a little bit longer. But yeah, we've been going strong, and you know, we try to do actually 2 events a year. When we celebrated our 10th anniversary, we created an EMM mini festival.
Nice.
So EMM begins in the fall, is always held in the fall, and it's either held at Lewis or at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. And I was getting contacted by colleagues in the area saying, "Hey, what do you think about, you know, bringing EMM to our school? We don't have any gear, we don't have any expertise in doing this, but we'd sure like to have a festival." And we saw a need in sort of my immediate area, and so we began with what we refer to as an EMM mini festival. It's actually an invitational only, so there's no submission process.
Yeah.
So let's say that you're teaching someplace, or you're at an institution, or you're just wherever, and you say, "Hey, I want to host an EMM mini festival." As the host, you basically invite people. It's a real opportunity to get to know people maybe you don't know. It sort of has taken on many different facets, but you know, sometimes it's, "Hey, bring your best 15 minutes of music." So there's no peer review. It's just, you're invited. We want to hear what you're doing, and we're going to do 2 or 3 concerts over the course of a day. And so we've done that at Central Michigan in Mount Pleasant. We've done it. We just finished it in March. We did it at Western Illinois University in Macomb, and then I believe next year we're going to be at Missouri Western in St. Joseph. So we've done it since 2010, and we've really enjoyed it. We've done it in New York. We've done it in Montana, which was a lot of fun. That's where my colleague Jason Bolte teaches. Yeah. And so we went out to Bolte's, and 3 of us drove, which was a hoot in February, to drive out to Montana in February. Not the best of ideas.
Oh,
but
Yeah.
I've
adventure.
driven through Nebraska in the winter. I can only assume that Montana in February is probably much, much worse.
you know, I gotta say, it's about the company you keep. I gotta say, doing it by yourself would not be fun. But you know, I had a couple of really great friends that went, and so we had a blast. So that's sort of the other facet of EMM. And what we do is we provide the gear, we do the programs, we bring all of that. We bring students to help, and generally the festival's like a one-day event type of thing for the mini festival.
Nice. Well, it's great to learn some of the history, and I guess I didn't know too much about EMM's other projects as well, and that's that's great to hear. I understand you serve as the chair of the executive committee of SCI as well, Society of Composers International.
Yes, I am the guy that you get an email from every day announcing the member of the day.
Yes.
So I don't know if I should apologize for that. I think it's, you know, I have mixed feelings about it. I'm sorry to be the one to litter your inbox, but it's such an important part of what SCI does.
Nice.
It is certainly mission driven. I mean, our goal is to disseminate the music of our members, and first and foremost, our members have to be able to support each other, and that's the way I see Member of the Day. It's a real opportunity to see what your colleagues are doing, and you know, there are ways to not receive that email if that bugs you. Although I gotta say, I've only had one complaint, and it's been going for nearly 2 years. So only one person has complained about doing it, but when people meet me at a conference or something, they'll say, "Oh, you're Mike McFerrin. Oh, yeah, I get your emails every day," and then they kind of smirk. So I know some people would prefer not to be quite so frequent, but that kind of ruins the whole thing, So so the executive committee of SCI is, I think there's 14 people that volunteer. Maybe one of the biggest misconceptions about SCI, and that may be because of how it's been presented in the past, is there being a national office or this or that. SCI is ran by SCI members. It's all volunteer. We have only one paid person, which is we pay him way too little.
Yeah.
He's retired, and he does it out of the love of it. I mean, really, he's one of the founders, and without him, it wouldn't happen. But everyone else that's involved, all volunteers, and we have 3 guys on the web team. We've got a person that does the SCI ASCAP competition. We have a person that does the CD series. We have a person who coordinates the student chapters. We have a person who's the student chapter representative. We have 9 student regional representatives. All of these people on the executive committee, I'm sure I'm missing somebody. Oh, Journal of Musical Scores, the person in charge of all of the submissions, a person that's in charge of the liaison with other organizations, and of course the president of the organization. All of these people work to make sure that members get their benefits. The executive committee is charged with implementing policies set by the National Council and the president. And so we're kind of the working board of SCI. We're without people like John Bellata, who's the editor of Scion.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have our Opportunities newsletter. He does that, on his own time. And does a great job with it. We have people like Michael Torres, and that does the newsletter, and there's big changes coming there, by the way. So SCI is a great organization. I think I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud to be a part of it. I'm honored to serve in that capacity. One of the things that I would mention about SCI is that, I don't know about you guys, but for me, my first performance outside of where I went to school was an SCI conference. It was what I would consider my first, professional gig as a composer.
Nice.
And I remember how excited I was to be a part of that, and how much I got out of going to that conference and having people talk to me about my piece, and then being able to hear other pieces by other people in different parts of the country. Established composers sitting alongside student composers.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that the other big misconception about SCI is that SCI is only for students. That's not really true. We rely very heavily on our more established composers. And I mean, one of our established composers is Don Freund. He's going to be the guest composer at the 50th anniversary SCI National Conference at the University of Florida next November.
Wow.
All of our adjudicators for the student competitions, for the CD series, for the journal, all of those judges are SCI members. We don't farm that out. We don't say, oh, well, let's go find, quote, an important composer, because we have a ton of important composers in our membership. Very established composers that this is their life, and they contribute greatly. So one of the things that I'm trying to work with right now, we have a marketing team to help with this, is to try to reverse some of these misconceptions about SCI that have festered and grown over the last several years. It's a great opportunity if you're a composer, but you're not a student. You feel there's opportunities to mentor students. You can really give back in that way. If you're a student, this is a great way to network and get to know people and see what it's about, see what it's like to be a composer, and what it takes. So I consider it the premier composer organization in the United States, and we have lots of room to improve, and but we're also doing lots of really great things too.
Nice. Or go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I would just add to that, having been to a number of SCI conferences, those are absolutely worth the price of joining the organization just to go to those, even if you're not having a piece performed on them.
Absolutely, and the thing is it's a relatively modest modest membership fee for the year.
Yeah.
And we do conferences. It's our focus. It's going to continue to be our focus, and I'm hopeful that we'll be ramping it up. Look for some bigger announcements coming on throughout the year. But oftentimes there will be a conference registration fee, and it doesn't even come close to comparing to what other professional organizations charge. There's one in our field that charges over $400 for a registration fee to a conference. Yeah, well, the organization that shall go unnamed.
Yes.
Actually, they're a great organization, but their registration fee is outrageous. But in other disciplines as well, in other humanities disciplines, going to the National Organizations Conference, it might be $600, $700, $800 just to attend, and we keep those registration fees relatively low. It's a great opportunity to learn more about music. I will say this, out of full disclosure, some of my best favorite memories of an SCI conference is when things haven't gone well. Certainly there have been many conferences where I've gotten maybe the worst performance of my life. That's okay. That's a great learning experience. I've always learned from it. At the same time, at that same conference, I've also, heard some of the greatest things I've ever heard as well. So it's, it is what it is, and it's what we do. And I think it's a great start for composers, and it's a great place for composers to stay and continue to be a part of that community.
Man, now I feel like getting more involved in SCI. And I misspoke earlier. It's not international. It's incorporated.
It's incorporated, yes.
Yeah.
And the website's very easy. It's societyofcomposers.org.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a member, a couple of things that you can do is you can create your own, what we call the My SCI webpage. This is just another opportunity. This is not necessarily intended to be, a composer website, but it's one page where you can put up a picture, you can link up 4 pieces, score and recording. You can put in a bio. We have some composers, some of our members that simply provide links to their website. It's about having, your name out there so that when, people search for Google, it comes up. Yeah. So that's free with membership. That's part of the membership. Right now we have, I think, about 1,200 members. We just did a big purge for non-payment, and those will all bounce back. They normally do. We generally have about 1,500 members. Right now we have over 400, I believe 400 MySCI web pages.
And you have to have a MySCI web page if you want to be considered for the member of the day.
That's true, but it's not just that you have to have a MySCI web page. You also have to have an audio link or an audio embedded into the web page of a piece, and you must have a picture.
And you should probably pay your dues too.
Yeah, you have to be a current member. Sure. Yeah, that's the other thing that gets checked. So,
man, well,
the other thing I was going to say, if you're a student and you're not a member of SCI, you're really missing out. Nearly half of our membership is students.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, the things that the student coordinators are working on, we just released the student mixtapes.
Yes.
These are phenomenal, and you can go on, you can listen on the website, but here's a great opportunity to have your music out there and be part of something. We're also going to be we're hopeful that we're going to be having another competition for students that will simply feature you, if you're the winner, on the website for the month, on the front page, where you'll have your picture and a piece, and that'll just be kind of like Member of the Day, but for the entire month. And that'll be a competition hopefully in August. So there's Hangouts, there's Google Hangouts that they've organized. They're organizing what they're calling snapshot conferences. These are conferences oftentimes shared between two institutions. So if you're a student and you're not a member of SCI, you're really missing out. And you can't beat the cost. I mean, it's like $30 or something. I mean, it's a pizza.
Nothing.
So,
yeah.
so
it's a pretty good pizza, but yeah.
Good pizza, yeah.
Well, that's what I spend on pizza, but
man,
to be fair, you're in Chicago, though.
That's true.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
true.
So you do get very good pizza.
We're not talking Domino's here.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, with between SCI and EMM and being a professor and composer in residence and directing electronic music program and everything, I'm amazed, and yet you still have time to write, it's all these administrative roles, and we've gotten Ben and I have gotten to listen to some of your music. Speaking of the SCI websites on your website, and you've got some great material up here. I'd love to chat about some of it, but it's just amazing, like getting to work on this kind of output as well.
Well, I'd say this: I don't compose as much as I would like, and I think that statement is shared by most composers.
Right.
I mean, it's the number one thing I hear. Oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time. Oh, I had time to do this. I studied with a guy who one of his favorite sayings to me was, nobody has time to compose. You make time.
Yeah.
And I wish I could make more time. There's a little realism there that has to filter in. But part of being a composer isn't, in my mind, isn't just about writing music. It's about being part of the larger community. And I mean, I really see what you refer to as administrative roles. I really see that as part of my scholarship, as part of being a composer. Like you guys doing this podcast. This is how we make music, better and for the world. There are way too many composers. You have to forgive me. I've only got 2 weeks of classes left, so if I come across bitter and cynical, I'm just going to ask for your indulgence. But we have a number of composers. I mean, I've been to concerts in the city that, a composer will, it'll be a concert of new music, and after a composer's piece is done, they get up and leave the concert, for freak's sake.
Right.
So that type of mentality isn't serving anyone. And as I'd say, if you don't like how something is being done, do it better. Please be involved and host a conference, give back, because that's what it's going to take. I just saw a headline earlier this week from a gentleman who was Eastman, I guess, who said, look, audiences are getting smaller. There's more performers and fewer people in the audience, and there may be some truth to that, and certainly that's the way in the composition world. Mm-hmm. But producing concerts, selflessly is, I think, one of the things that we're kind of missing in this world. There's a lot of people doing a lot of really good work, but there's more people who are just trying to get their pieces played, and I'm not sure that's all that healthy. Right. So, people should be doing more concerts. Sure. That's what I'd say.
Right. We've had.
I apologize if I come across a little bitter. Like I said, I only got 2 weeks of school left, so I'm much better in May.
No, we've had this similar discussions with past guests about the nature of competitions and how you have so many people clamoring for another spot. And I do see this as kind of the obvious solution to do more concerts as opposed to do more competitions.
Absolutely. I mean, there's something maybe fundamentally wrong. Maybe not. But, people don't enter a competition because they need the $250 prize money.
Right.
Right? They enter it because they want to win the competition. Right? They want to have that on their CV. Mm-hmm. And so, what's stopping people from saying, hey, I'm going to host a competition. I'm not going to charge an entry fee. And I'm going to have it peer reviewed. It's going to be adjudicated, and the win. I mean, the prize is you won. I mean, that's more of that's not a bad thing necessarily. But I would prefer instead of competitions, I would prefer people to say, hey, I'm going to organize a concert. Uh, I've got some speakers if it's going to be EA music, or I've got a performer who's willing to play a concert, and I'm just going to do a call for scores. And I can use a service like Music Avatar, which I'm also involved with,
Yes.
that you could use for your calls for submissions. To you might get 30 or 40 entries and submissions, and that is contributing to the community. That's contributing to the greater good in my mind. And then having a performance.
Mhm.
And I mean, you guys both. I mean, uh, you both know. I mean, we travel to hear our music. We want to be part of that. I mean, I've traveled a long ways for a little bit of music. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so people will come if you play it, and that's how music stays important.
Right. And one thing that I will throw out to our listeners, I mentioned this last month with Keith Kaufman. There are not a lot of summer festivals in the U.S. So if you decide you want to start a new music concert series, consider the summer when
It's a
everybody's
lot
off.
easier to travel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just avoid Labor Day and the 4th of July for obvious reasons.
Fair enough. Exactly. Man.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering if we could take a little bit of time to talk about at least one of your recent compositions. This piece, X Marks the Sirens. I was reading you had a performance of it at you mentioned the EMM and mini festivals and stuff, and you had one of those last year. This was performed at that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was performed at. It's been performed at EMM. It's been performed in New York twice. It was
Cool.
actually written for the soprano Katie Crawford,
Okay.
and who's done a lot of new music and been a real champion. And one of these great singers who's willing to take on and do electronic music. And so it was written for her. The text comes from a colleague of mine. And I went to Jackie and I said, hey, do you have any text? And she gave me, documents, hundreds of documents of poems. And there was something about this one that really appealed to me. And I knew I was writing this piece for Katie to be done on a composer's voice concert in New York. And I just really fell in love with this text. I have a background. When I went to college, I mean, my goal when I was in high school was to go to Broadway and be in
Okay.
music theater. And I've always loved that. My biggest problem was I'm just not a very good singer, and I certainly couldn't dance, and my acting was really not very good either. So I was kind of the opposite of the triple threat in music theater. So, but regardless, I've always loved music theater. I try to get to New York and see a show as often as I can, and I wanted to see how if I could, kind of do a fusion of an art song with a sort of a reference to music theater. So that's kind of where this piece comes from. It's relatively short. It's just a song, and I tried to yeah. So I guess that's probably all I can say about it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to play just a bit of it from the beginning. So here is X Marks the Sirens. Okay, so that is the first stanza of X Marks the Sirens, which
Yeah,
is, yeah.
it's a cool sound and an interesting texture, like the voice, the percussion, and the like kind of filter sweepy synthesizer going. And
You know, I've always struggled a little bit, even though I have a vocal background. You know, I think it's a real trick. I'm not entirely sure I'm successful in that piece or the other work I've written for Fixed Media and Voice. Um, but I think it's a real trick to find a texture that works, especially for mezzo soprano and EA. It's just it doesn't. It's I find that just really a tricky sort of balance to find something where it feels like they belong together.
sure.
Hmm.
And I was wondering, since I've only listened to I guess this recorded version of it, so there's sung words and also spoken words. Are the spoken parts, are they like sampled playback or are they part of the track, or would they be performed live as well?
Right. So actually, there are spoken moments in there, and it's actually the poet who's
Okay.
speaking. And so my idea was trying to find a way to bring those two things together. I'm not a huge fan of electroacoustic works that are based upon poetry.
Hmm.
Uh, it's just a personal thing, and so again, comes back to my probably weird personality of if you don't like something, just see if you can do it better.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the perspective I took on that. Was I think I can treat text better. I can do a better text underlay, and that was kind of my plan with that. So there's actually text. I mean, I think it's a little strange to have text that's part of the poem that the singer never sings, but it is presented in the piece by the poet, and that's part of the fixed media part. So there's a couple of lines, especially towards the end. The last line is, "Sometimes you have to shut up and unbelieve what you've read." I love that line, but I just really didn't want the singer to sing it, and so the piece ends with the poet saying that text.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, how did you generate the sounds that you used throughout?
That's a great question. So some of it are just, stock samples that go through some plugins.
Hmm.
Some of it was some vocal samples that are either pitched really high or time stretched and then sort of taken apart and maybe applied a different envelope on, so they're really unrecognizable.
Okay.
But a good portion of the piece, and this was kind of along the aesthetic of trying to create this fusion between a music theater slash, art song, concert music work, and so I think I used maybe the East-West cello for a lot of that.
Okay.
Ironically, I don't entirely remember, but I do know I used just some stock samples that I converted to audio and then placed in time.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, and like the synthesizer going throughout has what seems like carefully automated or done live control over the filter and stuff, and it's
Yeah, I think it's actually it's a model of a guitar pedal, of a guitar wah pedal on maybe the cello.
oh,
And
interesting.
so, yeah, totally, yeah, and it's totally automated. I mean, it's like you go in, and I did it in Pro Tools. I did that. I know what you're talking about. I did that section in Pro Tools, and I went in with the pencil tool. I did some of it live with the live automation, and then I went back and fixed it very specific spots with the pencil tool, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I was trying to decide whether to ask that question so directly, and that's
No,
that's
that's
great to hear.
I am as transparent. I mean, there's not that piece. I don't think there's, from a technological standpoint. This is what I also enjoy about the piece.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some pieces that I've written that, I think that they're so technically complex and sophisticated that they can be of only interest to me. There's no way that anybody else would be interested in that. But this piece is pretty much, it's pretty day-to-day technology. It's not. There's nothing. There's no secret there.
Yeah. Now, one thing that really struck me about this piece that you don't hear from a lot of EA composers, other than, you see it in Jason Bolte's work and some in Eric Honors, is that this has a recognizable meter. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that it has a groove to it.
Well, I think anybody who spent any time with my music would say that about most of the things I've written.
Yeah.
I don't know what. I think some people would say there's an element of being a crossover composer. I don't know if that's a term that people still use or not, or I'm pretty sure postmodern is no longer appropriate. I haven't got the memo on that one yet. But
I think we're at postmodern now.
Postmodern, okay.
Just keep adding posts. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I like a beat. I like a groove. I like to tap my foot to stuff. I like form and structure. I came to electronic music actually rather late in life. It wasn't until I was in grad school that I had any experience with it at all. So for me, I'm always interested in big, large timing structures and form, and how that form is related to some type of dramatic structure. So oftentimes my music will have a recurring beat, or as in several pieces of recent, an idea of a recursive isorhythm, a repetitive figure that stretches out over a course of a long period of time that then gets shaved off on each iteration. So a degrading isorhythm. And so those are types of things that are often very metric and very rhythmic. I really enjoy acousmatic works, and I've written some. But even my sounds, what people would consider my soundscape piece, has a beat. It has a beat. I'm not sure what to say beyond that.
Yeah, I was going to mention one of your earlier pieces in relation to the beat and also the complexity of texture, the Heisenberg principle. I don't know how to say what.
Oh, that's fine. I love introducing that piece on concerts because we were doing it in Bridgeport in Chicago several years ago, and we, as the composers, we had to stand up. We actually had a pretty decent audience, and we had to, give verbal program notes. And so I stood up and I said, well, the title of my piece is Delta P Delta X is greater than or equal to Planck's constant divided by 4 pi. Any questions?
Right. I think it's pretty clear, really.
Yeah, you ought to be able to get that, right? So that piece, I have such, of all the music I've written, I think I probably have the fondest memory of that piece, of writing it.
Nice.
That came out of somewhat of a collaboration with a colleague of mine who was chair of physics.
Okay.
And we would take students into the city, to the University of Chicago, to their Compton lectures. The Compton lectures, if you're into astrophysics or high-level physics, this is a great thing. They provide every fall and I believe every spring something like 11 free lectures open to the public.
Wow.
And I've always been kind of this physics buff, and the University of Chicago is this very sort of old-style Ivy League, place. You walk in and there's chalkboards, and it's really cool. And they always get this postdoc who takes you through this series of lectures, and I considered myself, pretty well versed in math and physics, but I also knew that after about the 4th lecture, you start off and the guy's talking and I could get about, 100% of everything he said. By the time you get to the 4th lecture, I'm getting about 50%. And then at one point, it's so far over my head, I'm just, he could say, oh, monkeys fly out of your butt because of this reason, and I would say, okay, well, if you say so, I guess that's true. Because I certainly couldn't understand it. Mm-hmm. The best part about the entire lecture series was the drive home, because unfortunately for him, the chair of the physics department would, be cooped up with me for an hour in his car, and all I would do is ask him to explain what was just said. And Leonard he is such a great teacher. He's retired now, but he's such a great teacher, and he could dumb it down, and that's a sign of a great pedagogue. Is somebody who can take something that's very complex and make people like me be able to understand it. Sure. And so I just decided I wanted to write a piece and for him, and one of the things that we had talked about was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And for those who may not know, it's a theory in quantum mechanics. It only exists in quantum mechanics that basically says that we can know the state of a subatomic particle. That means how it's spinning or whatever, or we can know its position, but we can't know both. And many people have made the correlation between that and how we listen to music. And so music is happening in real time, and as we're listening to it, we can stop it in our mind to analyze it and say we know exactly where we are at this time, right? Even on pieces that people consider having virtual time, or vertical time. Okay. Yeah. Or we can know where we are in the piece, but we can't really know both, because once we stop to analyze it, the piece has gone on. And so that was kind of the idea behind the piece. The piece uses only piano samples. It is a recursive isorhythm. The reason it uses piano samples is because Heisenberg was a pianist, and most of his neighbors and family and friends who knew him didn't know him as this great physicist. They knew him as a guy who was fun at parties because he could play the piano. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do for this piece, and I wanted to dedicate it to Len. In hindsight, I really wish I wouldn't have titled it with the equation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, because it always gets misprinted in programs. It's like the delta signs become question marks, and it doesn't get encoded properly. Sure. But
not many programmers are using LaTeX for their.
That's right. But it was one of the more fun pieces I ever wrote, and at the time I was doing a lot of stuff with, extreme spatialization with two channels. So the idea of having sound appear as though it's coming behind you. Even though the speakers are in front of you, that type of thing.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was a real mess. And it was one of those things we talked about earlier about with surround sound. The moment that you have access to something, you kind of do it all at once. Yeah. If I could criticize the piece, that's what I would say is I tried to do it all at once, and it ends up kind of blurring the spatialization. There's a lot of intricacy. And if you want to talk about sophistication in the technology, this is the piece. This is completely diametrically opposite of X Marks the Sirens when it comes from the technology standpoint.
That's part of why I wanted to mention it. Yeah, so I understand C-Sound is one of the tools going in, right?
I believe it's the only tool.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was... So I was setting up these things like... imagine that you had a virtual cube. So that cube has, height, and it has an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis. Mm-hmm. And I was filling that cube with these very short samples. And what I was doing was I was allowing the computer to choose the location in the cube of where to place those samples randomly. But then I was controlling the cube. So I could move the cube through the space, or I could make the cube bigger or smaller. And so the whole piece is, each of those layers has its own cube. The problem is I've got so many layers, I've got so many cubes, it just fills up the whole space. So you lose a lot of the spatial clarity. I mean, in hindsight, as I look back at the piece, I still enjoy the piece because it was a great, wonderful process, and I really enjoyed my time with Len, and I enjoyed composing the piece. But as I look at it now as a product, I say, yeah, if I really wanted to convey that, I could have done that maybe in a little better way. And again, it was about look, here's a pool of water, and I'm going to see how many different ways I can jump into that pool all at once.
So in the end, it's Cannonball.
Yeah, right. There's more than just the Cannonball for me.
Nice.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to play the opening section of that since that's queued up. Although we don't really know exactly where we're at.
That's right. Good, you got it.
Yeah. All right, here is part of delta P delta X is greater than or equal to Planck's constant divided by 4 pi. Okay, so that was just an excerpt right there. So going back to what you were saying about experimenting with diffusion, listening to that yesterday, I listened to it both on speakers and on headphones, and I have to say it is a much wilder piece with the headphones on, and how everything is so much more present in terms of the left-right panning than if you're listening to it on speakers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair statement, and I mean, the moment that it enters the space, right, it's bouncing off of walls and getting absorbed by furniture or people or things. So it's one of these pieces that is actually quite difficult to mix in a live performance, and I would say that it's been performed more often in an 8-channel speaker array than it has been in stereo in a live performance setting.
Really?
So yeah, and I always have to like cut this. If the speaker array is like either a double diamond or a circular nature, I always have to like cut out the front speaker and the back speaker because spatialization in that piece is so important. And I always try to find, the best performances I've had is where I've had, the ability to EQ each speaker as it's coming out of the board, because then I can, gradually grade it backwards. So, the speakers behind you act more like a tweeter array, and it helps provide that clarity and that separation. There's a circular notion to it that it kind of goes around in kind of the same direction, but that's the different layers, the different isorhythms, and so it's kind of this weird canon thing that occurs. But absolutely on the headphones, because you don't have that depth perception as being 50 feet in front of you, right? It's going to be more wild than if in a live space for sure.
Very cool.
So it seems like this is a piece, a studio piece, much more than like something that like somebody would be able to get from listening on their laptop speakers or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't have stereo separation, I mean, this piece doesn't make sense as well. I mean, I think there's still stuff there. I mean, the whole isorhythm and the canon that exists, but spatialization in EA music in general is really an important aspect. So there's not many EA pieces except maybe Jim Phelps mono sine wave pieces that would be appropriate for a laptop, so a laptop speaker. And I think Jim would love that, by the way. So so I think for me this piece requires, I hope, high fidelity equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hey, thanks for sharing these with your with with
Oh,
us.
man. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today on your podcast. And I want to, if you just allow me, I just want to
Yeah.
re-mention that emmfestival.org, May 20th is our deadline for our calls. And then I also want to bring your attention to SCI has 2 calls coming up. We have the CD Series Volume 30, and we also have the SCI Journal of Music Scores, Volume 54 and 45. Those deadlines are May 31st. You have to be an SCI member. You don't have to be an SCI member to enter, but if after you enter, you need to join. But you can enter those at musicavatar.org.
Cool. I'm gonna dig
Yeah.
into musicavatar.org. I didn't know about that before, and it seems like a wonderful thing.
Well, it started as really a way for Robert Voisey and Vox Novus to administer their several. I mean, they've done like over 80 15 minutes of fame calls,
Right.
and they were doing it all by hand. And Tony Reimer and I had an idea for developing a robust submission engine. And so we continue to work on it. In fact, I think we're working tonight via Skype on it. And there's lots of great things coming. I mean, the ability to save your works will be I'm hopeful that will happen this summer. So when a call comes forward, it's like clicking a button. You're not going to be uploading things several times. You'll be able to cut the amount of time it takes you to enter competitions dramatically. There's a big, giant, huge adjudication back end. So all of the judging can take place. The SCI 50th Anniversary National Conference got 642 submissions, and all of that adjudication is taking place on Music Avatar. And so it's a robust engine that is really serving itself well. And if you go to musicavatar.org and you go to the front page where you see the video, you can watch my hand erase music in a video. I mean, if you don't have anything better to do. So that's my hand erasing. Well, it's kind of, if you can figure out what the music is, then congratulations. It's actually a well-known piece, and all of the hints are there.
Nice. Unfortunately, we do have one thing that's slightly more pressing before we can do that. Nate, it's time.
Yeah, so at the end of each month's patch-in, we do this last final segment called the 2-minute challenge. And Ben did it last month, so I'm up this month.
Indeed. I have 2 minutes on the iPhone timer. Whenever you're ready.
All right.
What are you going to talk about this month?
I was going to talk about audio cables in general, talk about impedance and balance things and stuff, but as I was going about writing down my notes for it, I found there's a lot to talk about. Not like we don't always run into this, but this one for me was just getting a little overwhelming. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between balanced and unbalanced cables.
All right, whenever you're ready.
All right, so with audio cables, there's piles of different things like XLR, TRS, microphone, guitar instrument, RCA, aux cables, speaker banana plug, speak-on, quarter-inch Canon cables. There's a lot to and they come in different shapes, sizes, lengths, and everything. There's 2 things that are important, whether it's unbalanced or balanced, and the impedance going along the cable. Whether a cable is unbalanced or balanced generally refers to the number of wires inside the cable and thus the number of contacts that's on either of the connectors. Balanced has 2 insulated wires and a layer of shielding around those 2 insulated wires. This can be with a braided strand wires, or sometimes they even do foil if it's a cable that's going to live in a more permanent installation. The signal in balanced cables goes along the 2 insulated wires, not along the shielding. And so the shielding provides some insulation from extraneous noise and interference. And the other awesome thing about balanced cables, because they've got 2 cables or 2 little wires going, any noise that gets into those wires gets into both wires in the same way. And so in the device that you're using, you can have a circuit to use phase inversion to get rid of some of that noise. And that's really the primary strength of this balanced cable thing. So unbalanced cables are used for other things, but it just has one wire going through and then shielding around it. That's what you might use getting from your guitar into an amp, or sometimes for line level devices getting from that into a mixer or something. And the reason why you do something like that has to do with impedance, and that's yeah. In any case, unbalanced cables, because of impedance and also because of this susceptibility to noise, can only be so long, usually 20 feet or less. Balanced cables, also having to do with impedance, can be much longer.
And we're out of time.
I got through a good amount of that. But okay, thanks for listening. That's a little bit about balanced and unbalanced stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do impedance as its own separate topic one of these months.
Yeah. So with balanced cables, there's fan and power, ground lift, and all these connectors and stuff that I'll just talk about later, I guess. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So that's our 2-minute challenge for.
Well, nice job.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. How'd I do, Mike? Does that sound?
It was great. That's a huge topic. I have no idea how you would do that in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I thought I could, and yeah.
How fun! That's cool.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
if you want to be our first guest challenge, we're happy to let you take on Fourier transforms in 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah, in 2 minutes. Yeah.
All right, ready, set, go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I'm sorry to say this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm about out of time, but thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to hear about the organizations you're such a generously large part of, and hope to maybe next time talk some about your teaching and the rest of your music as well. And
anytime, I'd love to come back.
Yeah.
Besides EMM's May 20th deadline, are there any other major plugs that you have for upcoming concerts?
Well, certainly the SCI CD series and Journal of Music Scores, both with May 31st deadlines. Mm-hmm. EMMfestival.org is May 20th, and those are the big ones.
Yeah.
Also be looking forward to Vox Novus. They're doing a conference in October, and their calls for scores will be also on Music Avatar soon. And so keep your eye out for the Vox Novus. I believe they're celebrating 10 years. And
really?
So it's a big event. It's going to be a big event all over New York.
Very cool.
Nice. Well, can't wait to hear about this, and I'm going to try to get my submission stuff together in the next couple weeks now, I suppose.
Please do. Let me just say one last thing about EMM,
okay.
Because I want to make sure everybody understands. EMM is the social festival. Okay, so we firmly believe that the best part of a festival occurs in the bar afterwards. So
yes,
if that fits you, please submit. We have a great time. It's a real sense of community, if only for a couple of days. And it's a welcoming environment, and we try to provide good hospitality because we understand that it's a real sacrifice for composers to bring their music and bring their performers and bring their talent and share with our community. And so it's a real sodality that occurs.
Nice.
Well,
hear that, all our listeners. Come submit your stuff to this, and then we can all go to the bar. It'll be awesome.
Outstanding.
Indeed.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, so I guess there you have it. This has been another month of Patch In. This is Patch In episode 18. Thanks so much, Mike McFerrin, for joining us this month. And please. We've got a backlog of all of our episodes either in the podcatcher that you use, in the iTunes store, or at soundnotion.tv/pi. There on the SoundNotion website, we'll also have the show notes in which we'll lay out a couple of the things that we talked about, links to some of the things that we did, including stuff like the EMM and SEI and everything. There's also a couple places where you can support this show and the rest of our shows. There's through either a donation box, or we've got an Amazon search box. If you go and try to or track down whatever you were going to buy anyway through that, we get a little bit of a kickback, and it helps support us in doing this show and our other shows. But again, thank you so much, Mike McFerrin. My name is Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
And thanks. We'll see you next month.
Okay, we are done with the recording.
Cool. I will stop the broadcast.
Good.